In this video, we'll explore some of the important developmental changes that happen even before a person is born, called prenatal development, as well as newborn functioning soon after birth. As an adult, you have around 30 trillion cells in your body. Some of these are cells that make up your skin and hair, some of them are cells that make up your internal organs, and some of them, as we've already learned about, are cells in the brain that help you to perceive and think about the world around you. But how did all this happen? How did you get to be you? Well, believe it or not, you actually started out as just a single cell, called a zygote. But already this single cell contained the exact same complete set of unique DNA instructions that every cell in your body has now. So how did you go from starting out as just a single cell to becoming a fully formed infant? This is the process of prenatal development, and it is incredibly orderly, intricate, and complicated. Many things have to happen correctly and in the right order to support conception, prenatal development, and birth. Because quite a lot happens during prenatal development, researchers like to break down human pregnancy into different stages or meaningful units of time. Specifically, there are 3 stages of prenatal development: germinal, embryonic, and fetal. The germinal stage is the shortest. It begins at conception when a man's sperm fertilizes a woman's egg. The man's sperm and the woman's egg cells are each called a gamete, meaning that they have half of the DNA instructions needed to create a unique human being. Once they are joined together, this forms a complete set of DNA instructions called a zygote. Less than 24 hours after conception, the zygote begins undergoing a rapid multiplication and division process, creating more and more cells. Initially, these cells are unspecified, meaning that they have the potential to develop into any cell in the human body. However, as development progresses, these cells will soon begin to take on specific functions, such as becoming a cell that is part of the heart, intestine, eye, or maybe even a neuron in the brain. As we discussed in module 3.4, sometimes during this normal cell division process, the zygote actually divides into 2 separate, independent zygotes that will go on to become 2 different infants with the exact same DNA. The result is identical twins. As these cells multiply and divide, they also travel down the fallopian tube and eventually implant on the uterine wall. If implantation is successful, the woman's body begins releasing hormones that will stop her normal menstrual cycle and instead support pregnancy. After implantation, this begins the next stage in prenatal development, which researchers call the embryonic stage. This stage lasts from about the 3rd to the 8th week of pregnancy. At this stage, the cells begin taking on specific functions, such as forming the major body structures and organs of the developing infant. For example, the cells that will become the heart begin to cluster and will start to pulse around 5 to 6 weeks. Other cells begin to cluster and form the neural plate, which is the basis for the brain and spinal cord. As the neural plate continues to develop, it will eventually begin to fold over on itself, forming a tube. This tube closes from the middle section first, leaving both the top and bottom sections briefly open. During the course of normal development, these openings will fully close around the 4th week. However, if the openings do not close correctly, this can result in defects such as anencephaly or spina bifida. Anencephaly is a condition that occurs when the neural tube fails to completely close at the top. This leads to the baby missing major parts of the brain, skull, and scalp. As a result, the condition is nearly always fatal. Spina bifida occurs when the neural tube fails to close properly at the bottom. This causes a gap in the spinal cord, which can result in complications that range in severity depending on how large the gap is and the degree to which nerves in the spinal cord are affected. In more minor cases, the person might have hardly any symptoms at all. In moderate cases, the individual may experience slight issues with bladder and bowel control. More severe cases can result in loss of bladder and bowel function and paralysis below the waist. There are several factors that can increase the risk of both anencephaly and spina bifida, including genetic risks. However, a known environmental risk is deficient amounts of folate, which is the natural form of vitamin B9. For this reason, it is strongly recommended that women take folic acid supplements early on in their pregnancy. Women who are pregnant must be careful not only to consume enough vital nutrients, but also to avoid certain substances that could harm her developing baby, called teratogens. There are many potential teratogens, including alcohol, tobacco, and illegal drugs such as cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine. However, there are also several legal drugs, such as blood thinners and hormonal medications, that could also be teratogens. Teratogens could also include exposure to certain environmental toxins, such as lead, as well as exposure to certain infections and viruses, such as hepatitis. If you or your partner are ever pregnant, it is important to follow recommendations from your healthcare provider detailing good nutritional practices, as well as substances to avoid. The third and final stage of pregnancy is the fetal stage, which begins around the 9th week and lasts until birth. This is the longest stage, lasting around 30 to 32 weeks in a normal human pregnancy. During this time, major organs and body systems continue to grow and mature. Things like fingernails, eyelashes, and hair also grow. The developing brain also undergoes rapid growth and change, adding up to 2 million synaptic connections per second. In fact, studies have now established that even before birth, babies can learn and remember many things, including their mother's voice, certain properties of their native language, and the taste of foods that the mother eats. Most normally developing pregnancies will end with birth at around 40 weeks. If birth occurs before reaching 37 weeks, this is called a premature birth. Although the chance of survival is still relatively high, the earlier in the pregnancy that the infant is born, the lower those chances become, with births occurring before 22 weeks being considered extremely high risk. Even if premature infants survive, being substantially premature is associated with physical, sensory, and cognitive dysfunction as children get older. Fortunately, however, modern pediatric medicine has come a long way and holds incredible promise for premature infants. In fact, one of my cousins was born at 34 weeks and spent 2 weeks in neonatal intensive care. She's now a healthy, fully grown adult who is doing great today. After birth, newborns experience rapid physical and cognitive changes. As we already discussed in the first video in this module, most newborns do not yet have much muscle control, so their voluntary movements are relatively limited. However, newborns do come equipped with a number of involuntary muscle reflexes that help them with basic survival tasks. Remember from module 5.1 that a reflex is an automatic motor response that is triggered by a specific environmental stimulus. For example, if you stroke a newborn on the cheek, he will automatically turn his head in that direction, looking for milk. This is called the rooting reflex. And physical touch on the roof of an infant's mouth will automatically cause him to start sucking, called the sucking reflex. In addition to giving infants a way to interact with people and objects around them, these reflexes are also a helpful way for a pediatrician to quickly assess the physiological well-being of the baby. These motor reflexes quickly give rise to many voluntary motor movements as infants' muscles develop and their body proportion changes. As their body grows and their muscles get stronger, they eventually can hold up their own heads, roll over by themselves, push themselves up with their arms, and finally stand up on their own. Newborns also experience rapid cognitive development as they quickly begin to take in information from the environment around them. They also appear especially attuned to social information. For example, research shows that infants prefer to look at faces compared to non-faces. They can also distinguish between their mom's voice and face and that of a stranger. And as young as 6 months old, babies start to recognize familiar words and sentences even though they won't be able to talk for another several months. In short, infants' perceptions of the world around them are being rapidly shaped by all of the sensory input they receive. In the next video, we'll continue to explore infants and young children's cognitive development. In this video, we discussed prenatal and newborn development. For the exam, you should be able to define the different stages of prenatal development, germinal, embryonic, and fetal, and describe what happens during each stage, define neural tube and spina bifida, define teratogen and identify potential teratogens, define premature birth, and define rooting reflex.